Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. I'm Crystal with Sows. Today I'm going to be sharing some of my backyard work. But first, I have to amend the soil and rip out some of my fall winter gardening crops. So just to show you a little bit about what I have here, we have some seedlings that are ready to be put in the ground. But most of what I'm doing today is ripping out the old garden, putting in the new stuff. Originally, my soil was compost when I first started last spring. And then all I added to my soil before I planted everything was just some fertilizer, and I just put everything in the raised beds. But this year, just to add to it, I'm going to amend the soil with some manure compost, and then I will put fertilizer and then plant my garden. For the tomatoes, I will add fertilizer, but I also will add a little bit of Epsom salt and one cracked egg. Now the reason I do that is because I follow Roots and Refuge, Jessica Sowards from Roots and Refuge. I hope that's how you say her last name. And last year she recommended to put a cracked egg underneath each tomato plant, and so half of my tomatoes I did that with, and the other half I didn't. And there was a noticeable difference between the plants that did receive the egg versus the ones that did not receive the egg. So I will do that moving forward every year. I will tell you that I did plant one ground cherry already, and I did not put an egg under it. So I have another one I'm going to plant, and it'll be my comparator, because this is my first year to ever plant ground cherries. And I bought 3 different varieties. One was called lychee, one was called just ground cherry, and one was called Aunt Molly. So we'll see which one turns out the best, okay? The other thing I want to show you is that one of my raised beds is empty, and I need to add more soil. And I bought some raised bed soil. It's like basically soil for raised beds. I also have potting mix because I will be using some of my potting containers, and you just use potting mix whenever you have container gardens. I also have 2 bags of soil that I'm going to put on top of grass. I'm actually going to remove a layer of grass, and then I'm going to put garden soil. It's an all-purpose garden soil here, and this one is to go on top of your ground. So there's different types of soils for different types of purposes. Okay, if you're doing containers, you can use potting mix. If you're doing raised beds, you can just put compost. If you're doing on the ground, you need to rip up the grass or put cardboard over the grass to kill the grass off, and then you can use for the garden beds for the ground. Also, you can put compost and fertilizer. There's all different types of methods, so many methods. If this is your first year and you're using containers, I would just jump right in with potting mix and enjoy the ride. Make sure you have a fertilizer. There's, again, so many different types, and I'm not the professional on fertilizers, but what I can tell you is that just a basic one was great for me last year, and that's what I'm using again this year. So let me show you a few things around the garden, and then we'll get to work. Okay, here we have some of the beets that I grew about a month ago, and they're coming in. And I also have these are 2 peas plants that are growing up. Okay, these are collard greens, and they're starting to flower. I'm actually going to rip all of these up. These are turnip greens, and I don't see any turnips yet, but we'll leave those alone. Carrots I'm going to leave alone. Right here is spinach. I'm going to pull all of the spinach out. I already pulled out all of this bed of spinach here. These are radishes that are coming in. Pulling out all this lettuce. These are my Brussels sprouts that take several weeks. I'm leaving these in. But you can see here, I did plant a few radishes around, and so I'm leaving those alone. I didn't use this bed for the fall and winter, so I'm actually going to remove all of that mulch on top, rip out these little volunteer plants, and then amend it with manure. And then I'm going to plant okra over here. In this last bed, that's the one that I was telling you was kind of empty. I'm adding that soil for raised beds, a little bit of manure, compost, and some fertilizer to these. Okay, and this bed is where I had my broccoli. I already pulled my 3 broccoli plants out, so I will amend this with manure compost. I have carrots that I planted about a month ago, and then here are some radishes that are coming in. I'm leaving those in there. These are also radishes I'm leaving. I'm going to pull out this arugula, amend that soil. I'm going to pull out all of this arugula, and I might start another container with some more, or I might just plant fresh seeds, because as these peas grow up, these are 2 other types of peas. These are going to grow up on the trellis and hopefully give some shade. Then I can grow some root vegetables here in these beds. Okay, let's get started. The first thing I did was harvested all of the lettuce, spinach, and greens. I started by just pulling the leaves that I wanted to keep first and just put them into a bowl. This way I didn't have to worry about getting everything dirty when I pulled the root systems up. So first things first, pull all the leaves that you want to eat. And then when I started pulling up the root systems, you can save a little bit more. But I basically harvested everything I wanted, and everything I didn't want I put aside. I'm letting that dry out, and we'll add it to my compost eventually. So just cleaning out these beds, getting them cleared out, getting all the root systems out, and eventually I will amend these. This is the arugula, which you have to be a little bit more careful because the leaves are so much smaller. Getting everything I wanted, trying to avoid getting the whole batch super dirty. You can see that these have smaller root systems. You can keep a little bit of that soil, but not much is displaced with these smaller plants. Okay, here's the raised bed that needed the soil for raised beds. First thing, added that. And then I added a little bit of manure compost here. Just use some gardening tools to pack that in and then amend it really well so that when I get ready to add the okra, everything is ready to go. With these lettuce beds, I actually planted lettuce right after I ripped out tomatoes from this bed. So what I wanted to do was get all of the roots out and add compost, manure compost, mix it up as well as possible. And then under my individual plants that I planted here, I will put fertilizer and add fertilizer as directed on each, depending on the plant. With the greens, you'll notice that their root systems rip up a lot more soil, so you'll need to add a good amount of manure compost or whatever you'll be using to amend your beds. And also you want to twist the root systems out so that you don't disrupt the root system of the neighboring plants. I have root vegetables, the turnips and beets and radishes, things like that. You don't want to disrupt their root systems. So I amended this bed here, getting it ready for the next crop for spring and summer. And now that all the beds are amended, we can move on to the transplanting phase. Yay! Okay, now this bed is ready to add a tomato. So this right here is a Cherokee purple tomato plant. You can see the root system is ready to go. These transplants are about 6+ weeks old. I'm taking off and removing, basically pruning, all of the side shoots, which are called sucker plants, and removing those from this Cherokee purple plant. Cracking one egg as deep as possible, covering it up a little bit with soil, and then adding the tomato. Now with tomato plants, you can bury them or plant them sideways like this, because along that original shoot there are little hairs, and those little hairs actually turn into, or actually little roots. They can grow roots there. So you can actually plant your tomato plant like this. You can add something to support it, like a cage or a stake, and the tomato will grow up with the sun. Now basil, peppers, everything else, you can just transplant right at the root line. You don't have to go any deeper. So each tomato plant in my bed is getting a basil plant and a marigold. And then you just water it deeply. Water everything deeply. And move on to the next. So I did this for my entire raised bed garden. Okay, let's discuss containers. If you're going to be using containers, you want to make sure you have a good potting mix. And so each container that you use, you will want to fill almost all the way up with potting mix. Leave a couple of inches for your mulch, but you want to pack it in pretty nicely. Some people will wet the potting mix immediately. Here's an egg I'm adding for my ground cherry. This is an example here. And again, I pruned these slightly with ground cherries because I'm not exactly sure how much you can. So this is my first time. I'll learn a lot this year, but basically pruning slightly. And then packing it in. So sometimes you can actually moisten the soil before, or you can do it after. I chose to do it after, but you can moisten everything beforehand. Again, with these containers, when you get everything put in, you want to water it deeply so that everything can settle nicely. And so because this was fresh potting mix, all I did was add the egg. You can add some fertilizer. I'm actually going to add fertilizer to these later. I like to add my fertilizer. Okay, here you can see that I'm using a bowl to help alleviate the pain in your back by lifting all of these heavy bags. Putting some Epsom salt, putting a little bit of potting mix. If you cut the bag in the center, you can maneuver it a lot easier, and then it just rips when you get to a smaller portion, making it a lot easier to handle and alleviating any pressure that you might have if you have a bad back. This is what I do. I also like to use the table to with my seedlings and transplants. So this is just showing you, I wanted to show you how you can do this if you have back problems, because this is actually a lot easier. Okay, so a little bit of Epsom salt, a little bit of potting mix, get that really mixed together well. And then here we're going to be adding a cherry tomato. And this is actually a 7-gallon bag. So I wanted to experiment this year with a 5-gallon and a 7-gallon. I also planted one in a raised bed. So cracked my egg for every tomato plant. Of course, a few of them I didn't as an experiment. Remember, tomatoes you can plant sideways because all of the little hairs are roots, will make roots. And you can bury these pretty deeply. Okay, press it in well, and then we'll water it down in a minute. You can see some of these look kind of sad right now, but after a couple of days when they get settled in, they liven up. Here's an example. These are a few transplants that I planted a few days ago. It's been about 2 or 3 days now, and they've adapted well. So moving on to peppers. For the peppers, I will be adding only Epsom salt and fertilizer to this grow bag because this potting mix is old. So meaning I used it in a different season prior, but it's not anything you have to throw away. You can just amend it just like you would your raised beds. I'll be amending this by adding fertilizer and Epsom salts. I'm going to take a little bit of the soil out first to mix it in really well. A little bit of Epsom salt and a fertilizer. Again, any type of fertilizer will do for a beginner, but it is a science and it can get very complicated. Fertilizers. Mix it in really well. And for the peppers, this was actually a 7-gallon bag. I put 2 peppers in this bag, and I also had a 10-gallon bag that I put a couple of peppers in as well. These were all recommendations from experienced gardeners. This is my first time using grow bags, so hopefully next year I can offer a lot more advice. But from what I've researched, peppers do well in pairs, and 7 to 10 gallons should be fine. Some people will go all the way up to a 20-gallon container with peppers and tomatoes. And here's a final look before we water everything. You want to make sure everything gets deeply watered here, settled well. One thing you want to be mindful of when watering your plants is to water from at the soil level and not the leaves. Whenever the soil splashes on the leaves, it exposes your plants to different illnesses, and it's super windy here, so my water was actually kind of blowing on the leaves, which is okay, but you want to avoid it as much as possible. And in the future, as they grow taller and taller and start producing, you want to water from the bottom, at the bottom, okay, near the soil level. Well, we did it. Planted quite a few tomatoes, peppers. I actually didn't film it all, but I planted the nasturtiums that I started inside, and some of the zinnias that I started inside. I'm going to direct sow okra, and I'm going to direct sow marigolds all throughout the raised beds and by each tomato. And basil and marigolds are companions with tomato plants. They help to reduce the bugs and things like that, and it worked really well for me last year, so I recommend it. I just wanted to share my mess right now. This is kind of where I have everything. I got to clean up this porch area, but having a table like that really helps save your back. Just putting it right close to the garden where you're going to be using it is what I like to do, and that's really helped me. One thing you'll notice, I didn't have a pair of scissors. Keep a pair of scissors with you, that would be really helpful. I still have to come back and plant these little herb pots. I'm gonna put herbs in there. But I do have the blue ones are herbs. So I'm excited about spring and summer. I did some experimenting with variations of grow bags. Last year I only used raised beds for my tomatoes. This year I used raised beds, and I'm also trying it in grow bags, and I'm trying it in different sizes. I also tried to mix my peppers by putting two per grow bag, and in one of them I even put 3 per grow bag because it's a super large 10-gallon grow bag. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this is very helpful to you. Make sure to subscribe and share, and don't forget to sow the seed. Bye.